Welcome to the next session of the DoD Cloud Exchange. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are Mansoor Yusuf, the Chief Cloud Architect for Dell Federal, and Daniel Ellis, a Staff Solutions Architect at VMware. Manny, Daniel, welcome to the discussion.
Thank you for having us.
We're going to continue our discussion here on the DoD Cloud Exchange, where we're talking about cloud and security. It's a never-ending discussion, it feels like. One of the things that we're starting to see with cloud security is this implementation and really the importance of adding a DevSecOps process to it. So Dan, let me start with you and just say, where are we today with cloud security? It's much better than it was. People trust it more, but give me a sense of the state of the state of the market.
Yeah, Jason, definitely. I think when you look at the state of cloud across the Department of Defense and how organizations are really starting to look at it now, they're starting to progress and dabble into it and really move forward in it. But I have seen a tremendous effort when it comes to the DevSecOps initiative, especially within the Air Force, where the organizations are really starting to thrive and progress when they're looking at open source technologies and moving into platforms that allow them to run across multiple clouds. The biggest challenge that I see is cybersecurity, being able to translate the on-premise security components with the cloud capabilities in a hybrid model. But the most interesting thing is organizations in the Department of Defense really start to mature when it comes to containers and Kubernetes. There's a gap between the platform and the people that are able to provide the security posture for these new open source capabilities in that space. So that's a space where I see a lot of advancement that needs to be made.
Couple things to dig out from there. I think the hybrid model is a challenge that every agency is facing. Is it that they're trying to take the on-premise security ideas, concepts, controls, and apply them to the cloud, and it just doesn't? It's not a one-for-one trade.
Some of that, I think one of the key things that I see with that is organizations across the Department of Defense not really looking at so many incredible SaaS services, PaaS services that can really enhance security posture. So I think it's more of a traditional on-premise type of accreditation. And because they're not looking at some of these newer tools to outsource that capability, it really limits them, and it makes it a real challenge for cyber experts to understand not only things that are in their traditional on-premise capability, but now there's parts that are managed services that they don't have visibility and access to. And really, there's organizations out there that have built SaaS services that have the ability to secure these organizations in the cloud. And so I think it's really emerging together of that on-premise security posture into these new services that we see in the cloud.
Those are really good points. And just a few things to add, kind of layer right on top of that, right, is really an understanding from a lot of our customers' perspectives of, well, if I'm going to utilize a government authorized hyperscaler that may be at a certain impact level, and that is the requirement I have for my data set or my particular policy set, there's an innate lack of understanding at times where customers may assume that, well, if this provider is providing me with IL4, 5, 6, it's FedRAMP high, and once I put my data set there, then they feel like they can step away and say, I'm good. I'm able to check the box, when that's not actually the case. It's really the hyperscaler's ability to provide a secured underlying infrastructure and environment for the customer to utilize. Once there, then there's still the ability to secure everything up and above in terms of their own workloads, their own infrastructures. If they require ATOs for their applications, there's still processes that have to be defined and looked towards, and understanding whether it's not just lift and shift, but infrastructure as a service through software as a service capabilities. Where can I align my requirements with potential security solutions to fit my needs, as well as checking the box?
Manny, I still find it really interesting that a lot of agencies or a lot of organizations, we can probably add the private sector in there to a certain extent, think, okay, well, I'm using Cloud X or I'm using Platform Y and I'm done. I go, hey man, it's your problem now, right? I find that hard to believe that more agencies and organizations still believe that. Do you think it's just a misunderstanding of what their roles and responsibilities are, or is it something else?
It's a little bit of that, right? At times there are certain customers that are just mandated. I need to get there. What's my quickest way? I'm here to check a box because someone with stars on their with stars on their shoulder. Their label said, "I need to be there, so I'm going." So there is a little bit of that, but I would say it's more of a lack of clear definition in terms of a potential responsibilities matrix between, in let's say hybrid environments, the customer, the OEM providing the infrastructure and the software baseline, as well as the hyperscaler or CSP providing the cloud resources, right? So understanding whom owns what from a security posture and technical ownership perspective, then understanding where those demarcations lie in terms of hyperscaler X owns the service and security for its underlying capabilities. The OEM, if involved in a hybrid environment, providing some sort of hybrid platform to the customer site, what they do in terms of their underlying intrinsic security to the systems and the underlying OS and applications running things. Then the customer, okay, is it what part of my data set, what part of my application that is on my side of my border that I need to control and manage. So there's a little bit of confusion there at times, and understanding that, well, FedRAMP said that this Cloud X or company Y is able to provide me an ATO'd system or a FedRAMP impact level 4, 5, 6, maybe that's FedRAMP moderate or high solution, and that's the box. But there needs to be some education there in terms of whom owns what part of those systems and what part does the customer have to define and manage on their own.
Yeah, to kind of piggyback with what Manny was talking about, one of the areas where we've seen a tremendous amount of success actually across the Department of Defense, especially in the Air Force, is the stand-up of software factories to support DevSecOps. And what we've seen in these established platforms is really the ability to merge people and process with a secure supply chain. And there's had tremendous impacts with this. We've seen proven success into production operations with organizations like Kessel Run, and Kobayashi Maru over on the Space Force side has made tremendous strides to really drive themselves, not only to support an on-premise production capability, but also extend that to the cloud. And when we talk to organizations in the Department of Defense about security, really where they're starting to see the most understanding is really in securing of the application. And one of the trends that we see that's a little bit concerning with the DevSecOps effort is really the idea of just utilizing open source. Some of our largest global customers that have had success with impacting successful outcomes in organizations across the globe have really focused on a combination of using both COTS and open source to really drive and demonstrate capability and features that users want to use in a secure manner. And what we see in the DoD with the DevSecOps initiatives that focus solely on open source, but in reality, if you're focused purely on the security that's going to come out of the open source community, it limits you. So what we try to recommend as a whole, both with Dell and VMware, is really a blended approach of both COTS and open source, securing that together and allowing organizations to make long-term decisions for security and cyber to the cloud that isn't just focused on the idea of what happens on a particular project in open source, but where they can actually make shifts to the solutions they need in order to secure their applications.
Generally speaking, Dan, why is there some concern about too much focus on open source? There'll be people who will tell you, this is a good thing. We can see the code. We can understand the code. You can see where the bugs are. You can look at the bug. I can look at the bug. We can find the vulnerabilities and fix them. What's the missing piece? What don't maybe folks across DoD and other organizations not quite understand?
Yeah, the reality is that you really are subject to whatever the community can do to provide the most responsive security they can. And ultimately, if you actually utilize your industry partners, they're held to a standard in order to support these COTS applications in production environments. And also to include to that, the reality is that most of the Department of Defense is built on COTS applications. There are definitely some of GOTS applications out there, but really the idea of just going forward with open source and hoping that you can influence industry to be responsive supporting you is not really something that I believe is truly sustainable.
Completely agree, right? The two kind of main areas I really see that specifically in terms of issues is really support and security, right? To rely just on a community where in a development from a development perspective may be fine, right? You can push out to the community, everybody can respond and then provide feedback and potentially move past that hurdle. But in a SLA driven environment where, I mean, we're talking specifically DoD, generally these applications are mission critical. That is not the best use case in terms of that type of environment, to where not just from a financial aspect, but potentially lives are riding on some sort of application. I can't rely on just community insight and community response. I need something more tangible to reach back to. And from a security perspective, as you mentioned, right, everybody can look at the code. Well, everybody can look at the code, right? So understanding to where there may need to be some obfuscation there from purely a security perspective of understanding, blocking that type of information away in a much more secure and defined manner to work with a support entity when an issue arises in a timely manner, is definitely something much more effective for this customer set. But there are, again, lots of great things that we get from open source, but I agree with Daniel that a balance needs to be had.
Thanks for that explanation. I think people hear when we talk about open source, well, it's not us, so therefore we don't like it. But I think your explanation is really helpful, because it's not so much we don't support open source. You do. It's more about it has to be used in a smart way, like anything else. You can't go in one direction with all. If they only bought Dell's products, maybe that'd be great for you, but that may also cause some challenges too. So we got to find, it's always the right balance. Exactly. So I appreciate that explanation. And I think part of this leads into the discussion about having to understand what capabilities you currently have, and then integrating your security teams into those capabilities, and then making sure they're the right capabilities, because too much of anything is also challenging. Let me maybe start with Manny on this one as well. Are you starting to see DoD and other agencies kind of move in that direction to say, okay, what do we have and how do we ensure that security is part of that development process? I mean, I know we talked a little bit about DevSecOps.
So yeah, within this particular vertical, right, this customer base is used to, over decades, buying into large and small security companies and security software applications to support specific needs. And what that's done really over time is kind of spread things out to where, from a manageability perspective, there's not a lot of insight. I am limited from the perspective of the scope of the vendor I'm utilizing for that particular package or service to function at their level, right? Versus being able to potentially pull back to the 60,000 foot view and get a single pane of glass of everything's happening. And that just was the nature of the federal business over the last few decades, where they were really focused in on supporting specific security needs. And a lot of these companies out there did a very good job of fixing those particular issues and working with the federal government to get validated for those processes. But what has happened based on years of doing that is there are literally thousands of security companies out there focused on HCI, cloud, hybrid cloud, to build out specific niche solutions. And now that you have a very large manageability concern at this point, right? I can no longer get an overarching view that actually the hyperscalers are beginning to provide themselves of my security and the security apparatus within my environment, and how I'm covering everything from edge to core to cloud from a security perspective. So there's been years of that, and there needs to be some time pulling back to kind of focus on capability that Dell and VMware have been working on together, focusing on intrinsic security capabilities so that customers can get an overarching view of everything occurring while still having the ability to manage not just also a small scale.
We hear it quite a bit, this idea of single pane of glass. A lot of times people think, oh, it's another dashboard. That's what I need, right? Another dashboard. But I think what you're talking about more is this understanding of what devices you have, what's the configuration of those devices, and then are they out of date? When will they be out of date? Have they been patched? I mean, all those really cyber hygiene things we talk about, but easier to manage because of this proliferation of tools that we've seen over the last dozen years or so.
Exactly. Yeah.
Walk me through a little bit about how an agency could, or DoD in this case, could start to apply that single pane of glass.
So it's really at that point, really being able to focus on kind of pulling back, understanding, yes, some asset management needs to occur from a logical and infrastructure perspective, understanding everything I have from my top layer in. But then at that point, understanding how do I maybe layer what I already have dependent on the solutions I'm currently utilizing, but then looking at solutions that can provide or that have a base level understanding of what I'm doing from a security perspective and the security apparatus is managing through, right? I'm not managing to point. I want to manage through my environment so that I can obfuscate where necessary. So focusing in on the beginning being, secure supply chain for any infrastructure purchase, understanding where those componentry came from and having manageability and understanding at that level, through kind of back from a logical perspective of my endpoints, how I'm securing my endpoints, through how I'm securing my HCI, to all the way through my hypervisor technology. So looking at capabilities as we've done within Dell and VMware to provide a logical and therefore tactical route via what we're calling intrinsic security, of understanding everything across your entire environment, how they interrelate, how they interconnect, and how that can be pulled back and managed singularly.
Yeah, and definitely would like to jump in here. I think one of the things that I've seen, and I've spent a lot of time when it comes to working with executives across the DoD, talking about the zero trust framework, right? A lot of confusion from leadership and organizations on what tools and capabilities they have that align to a zero trust model. So one of the things that we recommend immediately on starting discussions is doing a maturity mapping of what they have in place. And so a lot of times I'll actually sit down with an organization and talk about the capabilities that their security teams have today. And then I'll actually have them look at the investments that they've made in VMware and Dell on the capabilities that exist and have them realign to that. Because a lot of times these organizations don't understand that the tools that are built that they have security capability and have the ability to be audited and utilized by cyber teams within these solutions that we provide. And so ultimately, doing a mapping of what their investments are today, how they really do meet security and align to a zero trust model, has had a tremendous amount of success. And one of the bigger customers that we've engaged on this with, we went through this capability and we talked to them about the roadmaps of what we're doing together. And so one of the things that we've identified across industry that's impacted federal so much is the idea of things being bolted on. There's silos between all these different teams. Things have not changed in that regard when it comes to how IT operations and security take place. And so we really start to say, listen, if you're going to use these solutions that you have with us or add on future capabilities, realign these teams to really make a difference, right? Embed your security folks in the operations and the development side. Show them how they can actually participate in this and audit these capabilities. And then the last thing that we do is we let them see the roadmap and the architectures that are coming with these solutions in the future. And we're really heavily focused on not so much a single pane of glass, but very tight integrations when it comes to endpoint security, workload security, and the identity of the users coming in. And if you think about situations like COVID and the ability to secure the remote workforce, that's key right now. And people are making these changes right now in real time. And so we really want to help them to align to these investments that give you remote worker capability, also have security and benefits that can support you.
Bringing in, just to add one small point to that, bringing in security from that perspective it allows them to grow in the maturity model that DevOps and developers have had for some time, right? Bringing in sec to the DevSecOps model allows them to kind of grow within that process and even mature to something like a continuous ATO process, understanding how we can move things faster from a security perspective instead of kind of holding everything down from that perspective and just maintaining security versus shortening the process to get things more secure.
I want to know which one of you is going to say this first. It's the easy part, right? It's got to change the people behind it, and give them this idea of what skill sets do the employees need to have, and just so they can fit into this approach. Obviously, I was making a little bit of a joke there, but Manny or Dan, jump in a little bit and talk about this. The biggest shoe to drop is the people. Can they manage within this new environment?
So I would say definitely yes, right? We always talk about people, process, technology, and the people. You're right; they're the biggest. They're the biggest shoe to drop from that perspective. But they definitely can. Sure, training needs to be provided. They need to be provided with the understanding of how models like this can mature at a rate much faster than previous models. But getting the background, the training on these new processes so that they can increase their knowledge set, and then they can provide a lot more benefit, right? It's the overall perspective of taking not just IT security, everyone within the technology realm, away from being a cost center to a revenue generating office, right? The ability to help push things at a much faster rate is something that we're definitely looking for across everyone who supports technologies at all levels, including security.
I had a conversation earlier today with Paul Puckett during our DoD Cloud Exchange, and one of the things that he talked about was getting capabilities more quickly to the warfighter. And I think that goes to Manny's point of going from a cost center to and in government, we don't usually use the word revenue generator, but I think that's the point. Get those capabilities quicker to the warfighter, to the edge, so they have what they need. Daniel, jump in, because I know I interrupted you real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about mission impact, right? It may not be a cost generator or revenue generation like that, but it's really about making a mission impact. And ultimately, one of the things that we've seen across the Department of Defense is they've called upon industry. There's been a much greater alignment with industry partners and the different branches of the military. And ultimately, I think that happens from better training and enablement of the different people that operate and maintain these mission and weapon systems. And ultimately, the challenge is having the skills, right? So when we look at this kind of talent creation, ultimately in the Department of Defense, they really need to work to make it more attractive to develop and produce code, to come in and use different types of security methods, to be more agile and responsive. And like Paul alluded to, ultimately moving that capability closer to the operator and that mission is really the key focus. And I don't think that can really be done without kind of a crawl, walk, run methodology where you actually use transformational services. Because we've talked about this earlier in the discussion about people and process and the culture, right? The Department of Defense has made great strides to really drive improvement in acquisition, the ability to get people and software out to the warfighter. Now they need to really invest on the transformational side where they start to look at how they operate today and move more quickly to be successful.
Gentlemen, I very much enjoyed the conversation. We're just about out of time. Before I let you go for this session, I want to bring up all this because this all fits nicely into the JADC2, the ABMS discussions, these big data-driven projects that are ongoing across DoD. If both of you maybe give me a minute or so or less about how the cloud, the security, the smarter integration, the skill sets all fits in to making something like a JADC2, making like an ABMS successful. I think we started with Dan, so maybe Manny start us off on this one.
Sure. So I would say from that perspective, everything we've really hit on today is extremely important, in particular to those particular programs. From a JADC2, right, where you're bringing all these different branches together, the integration that is required of their different environments to then not just from a basic identity management perspective, but understanding how I can bring these environments together and how I can manage from a technological aspect and secure everything at those levels, right? These are not small entities we're talking about here, these 4 branches with, hundreds of thousands of personnel within each, right? So being able to support that from an integration perspective and then being able to maintain, if not exceed, security requirements. Everything we really touched on today kind of hones in on those on their particular requirements and needs.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that ultimately we see things like ABMS and there's incredible transformation. They're allowing for CRADAs, they're allowing the ability to do on-ramps, to demonstrate these innovative capabilities, lower some of the security requirements in order to allow for greater technology to be brought in. We're seeing tremendous impact and results when it comes to edge, it comes to the overall WAN that ABMS is utilizing. And ultimately with ABMS and all of this innovation and industry partnership that we're seeing moving so rapidly, that's feeding upstream into JADC2. And we understand that JADC2 is really focused with the data and the outcomes to the operators, but we really do believe that there's got to be a transformation of the applications and the way those applications handle the data. And so ultimately those integrations of lessons learned, and we're already learning today within ABMS that between different programs that are doing testing, there's not as much communication. So we would really say, open up the communication lines, provide the lessons learned, move that upstream to JADC2, and let ABMS be that driving force that makes all the branches successful going forward.
And I know JADC2 is a big data project. You got to have the cloud, you got to have security, you got to have all those pieces and parts to make it work. So this has been just a tremendous conversation. I really appreciate everyone's time. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this session of the DoD Cloud Exchange. So let me thank my guests. Mansoor Yusuf is the Chief Cloud Architect at Dell Federal. Mansoor, thank you so much for taking your time today.
Thank you for having me.
And Daniel Ellis is a Staff Solutions Architect at VMware. Daniel, I enjoyed our conversation as well.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Jason Miller. Now let me send you back to the studio for more DoD Cloud Exchange.